Oh, God. Where's the rest of the burqa?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Oh, it's not a phone. Anyway, that's not really an outtake. Paul's going to readjust things again.
This is Sarah Levison.
Paul Tiger is right here. And we are both sides of center. All right, Paul. We couldn't come up with the title, so...
Well, it'll happen.
The title's going to happen. Okay. So we're talking about voting methods today. Wait a minute. Don't go to sleep. It's not snooze fest. Unless you really need to go to sleep, then continue on.
Right. We don't have an election coming up. Of course we do. There's always an election coming up.
That's right.
And if you're
we're
watching
an even year.
CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, that's what they're focused on. It's election all the time.
And we've had a slew of primaries the last few weeks, too.
And there's always the gamblers.
The bookies.
The bookies, that's it. The bookmakers that are gambling on 50-50. So that's what we have. We have binary voting. It's called plurality voting, but it doesn't really give a lot of choice. Mm-hmm. It gives you one choice or some other choice. Mm-hmm. So we have...
and you also risk, if you make the wrong choice, you can't just cross it out. You got to go get a new ballot. Right. It spoils a lot of ballots.
We also have spoilers.
Yes.
So spoiler elections, and that's where, for example, in the last election for mayor of Longmont, there were two candidates who were on council. They got close to, one got 38, one got 41%. And then there was this guy who got 21% of the vote, and he was the spoiler. He was an unknown. He really didn't have
he was known to at least several thousand people.
That's true. That's true. And that's Gregory Harris. Maybe we'll have Gregory on sometime. He was a lifelong libertarian until he ran for office when he became an independent. But he represented a spoiler. And many people have said to me, oh, this race would have gone differently had he not been in the race, mm-hmm. or if we would have had a different voting method.
What voting method would have made a difference in that election?
Well, instant runoff voting, mm-hmm. Sometimes known as ranked choice voting, or my favorite, approval voting.
So let's do some definitions, Paul. I think I know what ranked choice voting is. You, just like when you're asked to choose what you want, on a menu to eat, 1, 2, 3. Basically, you've got 3 candidates, 4 candidates, 5 candidates, and you say, I want this to be my number 1, and my number 2 is this person, number 3, number 4.
So you put numbers by
them. You put numbers, yeah. You rank them.
You grade them.
Grade them. You rank them, in fact.
My mom, who voted a ballot in Boulder, where there were 17 candidates for 4 seats, mm-hmm. And my mother actually graded them. That's how she uh-huh. referred to it. Mm-hmm. And she was kind of upset when she got her ballot when it wouldn't let her put in all of her choices. Mm-hmm. She could only put in 4.
4, right. Or if she put in a 5th, it would spoil her ballot, and her ballot would get chucked out, right? So what happens, though, if you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3 for candidates you voted for? What happens when somebody chooses your number 1 and someone else's your number 1 turns out to be somebody else's number 2 or number 3? How do they count those?
So what they do is they rank choice or instant runoff, which are the same thing. They tally all of the votes for the one candidate, and if that doesn't win, then they tally a second rank, And so
So wait a minute, let me make sure I understand. So your candidate number one, we'll say candidate number one, got 1,000 number one votes. But that 1,000 was not enough necessarily.
That was not the majority.
Not the majority.
51, did not break 51%.
51%, okay.
Oh.
So that assumes you have to break 51% to be elected.
Right.
Okay. But in a regular election, like you mentioned, an election with a spoiler, you could have people elected that might only have 36% of the vote. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that person has gotten 1,000, but that's not 51%. Then you go to look at how many people voted for them as their second choice.
Right.
Okay.
And if there is, when you use the second choice, the ballot, the one vote, transfers. So they have the single transferable vote. So if your first choice doesn't win, then we go to your second choice. And that's now.
So what happens if there are?
I'll just say that if you have a third choice and a fourth choice, those don't count.
Right.
It's only your second
Top two.
choice. So it's your top two.
Okay. So what happens?
That,
when,
of course, is that if you're filling one seat, what happens if you're filling
multiple seats,
then you have more rankings.
More rankings, okay. And then it gets really smelly because it's ranked. Right?
I believe it's very ranked to begin with.
So in a race with three candidates, though, if those the candidates that are the closest to the top, how do you then decide? I guess it's which of those two candidates got the most second choice votes. It will be eventually the one that wins.
Right. So,
and in reality, have we seen
that?
Yeah,
if your first rank wins, then you really don't need to go any further. If
right.
you're past the threshold or the 51% or whatever your percentage might be, it could be something different.
So, for example, in Longmont, we have an election every 4 years where you've got 2 at-large seats open at the same time. And so if we had ranked choice voting and we had 5 or 6, and I mean, there was one year in the 90s or the early 2000s that we had 12 people running. It was what I call the Kentucky Derby of at-large seats.
Right. So there were 2 at-large seats open.
And 12 candidates.
And
in that circumstance, when you have 12 candidates running, if the vote is split so finely, then you could have somebody elected with 20% of the vote.
12% of the vote.
Even 12%. Yes.
Okay, so this is Boulder, remember, where we have the 17 candidates for 4. And someone wins office. Actually, the last election, you can find that there are people who won office with 16% of the vote.
And what does that mean fundamentally? It means that if you have a large pool of candidates for multiple seats, somebody that might actually just be a single issue candidate could be elected. And why is that bad for democracy then? Why is that bad for the city?
Well, they're only going to be focused on their particular issue and may not actually have any clue about what government does otherwise.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily disqualify them, but again...
but they'll be fairly focused on that.
So basically the idea of democracy is we want a lot of people to support the choice that becomes the person who's going to lead in office, who's elected.
I'm not going to disparage candidates who won by 12% of the vote or whatever.
Who won office with only 12%, right.
Right. They managed. What I disparage is the system that gets that. Okay, there's nothing wrong with the candidates. Or maybe there are. Maybe they're all evil. Whatever. The system that decides that is really doesn't reflect the will of the voters.
And it's not really consensus of the vote that was cast. Or the desires of the electorate.
Which is why we have bookmakers on CNN and...
betting on one or the other.
Yeah, right. MSNBC and Fox. They're all bookmakers.
So ranked choice voting we covered, but ranked choice voting, the calculation for more than
We
you know,
didn't
one
really
office.
cover it. What
No, we didn't.
I'm doing is rejecting it.
Okay. So we're throwing out ranked choice voting because what we want to concentrate on something that's more
I'm
equitable.
not qualified.
There's too much arithmetic for you.
I'm not qualified to support it. Okay, so we should have someone on to support it. We can investigate. I will say that people who are interested in ranked choice voting as an alternative, there is a group called Fair Vote. And Rob Ritchie has been here.
Is that a group from Colorado, Fair Vote?
No. Oh goodness, I want to say that they're from Maryland, but I'm not really sure. They went after small states, small populous states. They got in Vermont and Maine. Okay. And I believe that they're working on Massachusetts, but that's okay. This is fine. They have enabling legislation in Colorado. The enabling legislation in Colorado came in 2009 before Rob Ritchie and Fair Vote. I think that it is really complex and difficult to explain, and I didn't do a very good job because I hate it.
Well, also people that are election deniers now, like the top of their heads will explode for ranked choice voting.
It is. So if it's difficult to explain or difficult to understand, there are many opportunities for it to go wrong. Okay, and that actually in Colorado would be some of the history. I want to talk about is approval voting, which is what we do all of the time, every day. My favorite example is a group of friends are ordering a pizza. How many people will tolerate pineapple on their pizza?
Or even on half the pizza.
Okay, or with Canadian bacon, and on half the pizza, or which half, and what are people doing? Show of hands. How many people want this? How many people want that? And you're making a multiple choice because. And then, okay, well, we had, 6 people that want this, and you're the only one that wants water chestnuts on your pizza.
Right.
You lose.
Right.
Okay, and that's
that's approval voting.
And that's approval voting. And
so in the race, in a three-way race for an election, as we had for the mayoral election last fall, how would approval voting work?
You vote for all of the candidates that you approve of.
Right.
Now, you don't have to, but you can vote for more than one. Now, here's the simplest thing. Let me explain. It's so easy. You vote for one or more and count all the votes.
And if you vote for 3, it's like not voting at all.
That's true. You can
vote for all 3, but you're voting for all 3 actually doesn't get you one registered vote.
It spreads. It spreads the ballot. So, but you can vote for more than one. And so I like these 2 people, and I don't really care for this guy, and I really don't care for that whole agenda that he is representing or whatever. So I'm going to vote this way. I want to lean in this direction.
But you could still possibly have a tie.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you have these people that are voting for all 3, because they can't figure it out. So if you're voting for all 3, you shouldn't be voting at all.
Well, effectively, it's not a vote. If you vote all 3, you might as well leave the ballot blank at that point, right? So,
but it does defeat spoilers. And it does, or it doesn't defeat spoilers.
But it also allows one candidate perhaps to get to 51%.
Right. And it also helps spoilers. I mean, someone who is considered a spoiler, I've been considered a spoiler, but I didn't, I wasn't trying to be a spoiler. Actually, I wasn't trying to be elected. We've already discussed that.
We've already discussed that. Yeah, you're not interested in being elected, really. You like running, you don't like to be elected.
I like to talk about issues.
Yes, of course.
But those people who, Greg Harris could have done much better. As a matter of fact, maybe Greg Harris could be mayor. It's Libertarians and Greens and third parties have been using approval voting internally. Greens were using instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting. That's where a lot of that popularity comes from. The interesting thing is that in the last 10 years, the Greens in various states have been moving to approval voting. The reason is that they have to keep explaining what's going on with with ranked choice voting. It's not transparent. Things happen and then people don't understand what happened. When you simply count all of the votes with approval voting, that's very simple and no one has to explain anything.
And it seems like, from what you're saying, approval voting is less black and white, and it's got gray mixed in. Because instead of just saying, I'm going to vote for, you know, 2 people or 2 people only, and you might not be able to decide really between those other 2 candidates who you also like. You had to make a choice that not necessarily you could base on any empirical data or anything else. It might just be an impression. So, for example, our last election that we had for at-large, where we had 2 at-large seats, your most effective vote, if you knew basically someone was going to run away with as a landslide, if you had only voted for the one candidate you preferred over all others, then your vote actually meant more for that candidate, because then you weren't voting against them by voting that other choice.
That's correct. And people...
Is that clear?
People, what you're talking about is block voting, like block voting. I think, though, more about, it used to be that on our council, that when there was a vacancy, that the other council members would appoint someone until the next election. And that hasn't happened recently. I think that may have been written out.
Well, no, it's not. It's still in the charter, but there's a lot of things in the charter. It says they should have, it depends on how much of the term is left, and when Mayor Peck advanced from her council seat into mayorhood, the charter was really clear that you had to schedule, the council had to schedule
An election.
with it, and they scheduled the election, and they basically canceled it or extended the time on it.
But if someone had dropped out,
well, when Greg Winger, Councilmember Winger, dropped out of Ward 2, then I was one of the several people that applied for that remaining part of the term.
I'm sorry. When people are appointed, who is it that gets appointed? So is it special friends? The easiest way to do it is just to go back and look at the last election. Find out who ran for that seat and got the second highest number of votes.
And that would be approval voting philosophy, wouldn't it?
Right. So that would really give you a very, otherwise it might be...
Instead of redoing the whole election, if we had approval voting with a stipulation that if there's a vacancy coming out of, a council member advancing to mayor, then we would actually have someone the electorate had approved of.
And it also shows, if you can see the tally of all of the votes, the direction that the electorate is taking, where we would like to go. It's not a black or white. Well, this guy won, but we don't know what happened with the others. How did the voters feel about those other people? Which, when it comes to a replacement or a vacancy,
it would save the cost of an election, which, a special election would have been a lot of money, number one.
$400,000.
Yeah.
$400,000.
We should have put something else on the ballot, Paul. We could have thought about another ballot initiative and run it.
I'm only talking about $400,000 in the city of Longmont. So if you have a ballot, a citywide question, or you're voting for at-large or mayor, that's a $400,000 election. That's just amazing, because it was just a decade ago, move the decimal point, it was less.
Well, for recently, though, we've had a vacancy for House District 10 in Boulder, and so would you look at using approval voting with that kind of a vacancy to go back to a primary that might have happened, 2 or 4 years ago?
So let me ask you...
To do a vacancy in that way. I mean, council is one thing, that because we're nonpartisan and election, and the elections occur rather frequently.
Well, council, for example, uses approval voting now. And we've talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Sarah was on council.
Several people need to be appointed to a committee, and you vote for, the ones that you like.
Right, and on boards and commissions, on particularly close to the election of new council members, there are a lot of people who are coming on board, and so it's a wide ballot. I mean, council might have, quite a few names on there, and they could be sitting there all night trying to go through rounds of who, and so the easiest way is to put all the names on there, and council does an approval voting, and that's a very fast and easy to tally election.
And it also can build consensus among the council.
Right.
Otherwise, you could go through many rounds of someone holding on to someone that absolutely recognize every round they don't make it far enough, that your other council members are signaling you that we really don't want this person.
Right.
And then certain people are persisting. So
council members are actually sitting there, giving each other the eye, and and they have secret ballots. So the easiest thing on that secret ballot is to list everybody. Vote for the ones you like, leave the other ones blank. You're done.
Well, actually, for boards and commissions, the clerk reads out who voted for who. The only secret ballot is when Mayor Pro Tem is chosen by the council.
Oh, okay.
That's a secret ballot.
All right. Well, I'm not a fan of secret ballots, as we know.
I know you're not a fan of secret ballots. We did the Colorado Open Records Act.
Right.
Cora, we're not afraid. We're not in favor of a lot of secrets in government.
In that episode, I think I talked about taking pictures of my ballot and putting it on Facebook because it's a $50 fine, and I'm always trying to get arrested.
Eventually, you'll get arrested, and somebody may throw you in jail, Paul. That will not be a pleasant experience.
So, approval voting was used in the House District 10 vacancy committee election. It's an appointment, and. Let's talk a little bit about that. So that's House District 10, which was Edie Hooten. And after the primary is when she resigned. And
her replacement is appointed by the vacancy committee to serve out the rest of the time until the next swearing in. But also that person then is the nominee that the Democratic Party is putting on the ballot, since she had already won the primary.
But
I don't think she had a primary opponent.
We should be clear that she wasn't just nominated to the primary ballot, that which passed. She was appointed to Edie's position.
Yes.
So she is currently the representative of House District 10. Not just a nominee.
Right. But she then, it's Junie Jones, who's a council member currently at Boulder City Council, though that she filled the vacancy for the current seat, and then she was the party nominated her to replace Edie on the ballot. And effectively, the primary, and they couldn't really hold a primary even though it was a party issue because the primary had passed.
So she is on the November ballot as the incumbent. And she is the incumbent because she, on Monday, became the representative.
So how did they use
So they used approval voting. They used several ranks of approval voting to clear down the candidates to two or three candidates, and then they used plurality voting. Okay. Now, this is also the University of Colorado. Steve Bosley was there as the chair of the regents. They were filling the position of university president, and they did that first with Hank Brown. And how they did that is they had all these candidates, which were like 30 candidates, and they first had to figure out who they were going to interview. And they used approval voting to skinny that down to who they would choose. And I love this. They then did interviews, and then they used ranked choice voting to select the university president. At no time did they use plurality voting, which only is, it's binary.
When you're having a general election, like for Longmont City Council, since this is a local affairs show, you wouldn't do that two-step method. You'd use approval voting, approval voting.
Right. It would be.
You wouldn't go to
one.
approval voting and then ranked choice, and then approval and
But
plurality.
my point is that these are methods that they chose, that they liked, and this is, you know, a higher education, and, you know, the flagship school of the state.
Smart people.
Right. And Mensa. I would like for people to look at they show all of the applications, all the places where people have been using approval voting. Smart people use approval voting. Whether it's approval voting or ranked choice voting, they're using a method that's different than what we use now. And I've been working on trying to get people to use approval voting for almost 10 years. And Rob Ritchie has been working on ranked choice voting, and there's many people, we're not at war with each other. That's to understand. We all are at war with plurality voting, that binary one choice that gets you nothing.
Well, and one of the websites that I read that I will call up just here on my phone is called the Center for Election Science, and they actually have done some very interesting analysis of this, I guess, for presidential elections, and applied, done the polling and applied, you know, how, again, since we have such contentious binary elections, Democrat, Republican, and these other ideas that might be consensus building, especially for Congress and the Senate could come forward, are not able to rise to the top and appeal. Voters don't want this controversy a lot of the time. So in order to bind the electorate to get more of what they want, they did the analysis, and it said the Green Party did much better with approval voting.
Right.
So the electorate can send signals. And instead of, frankly, you know, Andrew Wang, who's a former presidential candidate, was going to start a third party.
Yes.
With a bunch of other people, not just Democrats, Republicans, moderates, independent or unaffiliated voters.
I'm a member of a third party.
Right, you are. But look at it this way: in state of Colorado, unless you're Democrat or Republican, if you're not affiliated with those two parties, you have a very poor chance of getting elected, even if you have the best ideas. And I think approval voting could bring some of those other voices that people are would listen to and make other choices, and that would fundamentally change this divisiveness, perhaps, because you don't say somebody doesn't want to be a Democrat or Republican, but they want to run for state office.
One of the things that, whether it's approval voting or ranked choice voting, really tones down the negative effects of negative campaigning. You know, you're really not sure who you want to campaign against if everybody can get a vote.
Instead of saying that person is evil.
That's right. And so these
will be a disaster.
The big anti-campaigns may actually not work in your favor at all. And
that, I think, would have a moderating effect, and maybe people would focus more on, you know, the nuts and bolts of issues and what people want to do and see in their government.
So who would oppose approval voting? That would be the media and the bookmakers. So,
well, and I think the two parties, it would be a threat to this, as you say, the binary plurality voting.
Right. So when I spent, you know, about 5 years at the state legislature working on approval voting enabling legislation, and I did stop doing that, and there's a reason which I'll get to in a minute. But I was amazed to find all of a sudden we had when we got out of the woodshed and we had a well-written bill and we had well-known legislators as sponsors and co-sponsors, all of a sudden we were on the map, and that's when we got attacked. And
Who attacked you?
The service employees union, all the unions. So unions attacked us because we were going to change the way the game worked. We were going to change the odds. They didn't want that. They
might have to split how many candidates they invest in.
Yes.
And not just choose one.
So the lobbyists that they hired in Denver to do their evil work explained to us exactly that, and that's yes what it was.
But I wonder if the unions have a way, if they used approval voting in their elections for their unions.
I think it
would be a test for them and be something they would find as useful to the structure of their organization.
Yes, beneficial for them. Used by many organizations, but if you want to completely control what's going on, then you don't want approval voting. You'll like binary voting. It's going to keep you incumbents in office.
Well, also it'll keep everybody, it's exclusionary, if you will, because again, when you have a Democrat and Republican, and in the history of Colorado state government, no person that's not a Democrat nor Republican has ever been elected to state office.
Right.
To me, when more than 30% of the electorate has rejected their the two-party system and enrolled as an independent or unaffiliated, that's meaningful.
Yes, you and I know people who have been elected to office who were not representative of their parties, who are fairly independent.
And they get in trouble with the party.
Yes, they get into trouble with the party, but then they've been elected. They get censured. People have been censured.
And we know at the national level, there are a lot of people, Liz Cheney specifically,
right,
in Wyoming, who just lost her primary.
Yes, who will never be elected again. And they've done great work.
And she's a real conservative.
Yes.
Her father was a real conservative, too. So, yeah. So people that actually represent the party.
I'm sorry, her father is an international criminal.
But he's really conservative. So I do think that you've convinced me that approval voting has great merit over plurality.
And it does, and over plurality. But I will say that ranked choice voting does as well. I'm not a fan of ranked choice voting because of its complexity. And let's take a look. So in 2009, there was a law that was passed, which was John Kafalis, and I've mentioned him before. He sponsored some bills that I worked on.
From Fort Collins, yep.
Great guy. And this was the People's Choice Act, and it was enabling for ranked choice voting in local elections. So before that, a lot of things that can happen can't happen, can happen by the state. The state can do it, but locals can't.
Right.
And so they had to be enabled to do that.
That's exemption.
Yeah. And I would say maybe the last third of the text of the law talks about the future, which was we have to keep coming back and having these reports. And by the way, that's true of a lot of elections law. We always want to have a review to see whether or not this was effective. Not after 50 lawsuits, but every 2 years. And so to look at this, because what we were seeking was machinery. At that time, there was no machinery that would count or tally or would scan, however you were going to be able to do it. So ranked choice voting or
approval voting either.
Instant runoff voting. No, approval voting is instantly works on any ballot.
That's right. It works on any ballot, yeah. Okay. But ranked choice voting is,
Yeah. I mean, on approval voting, all you're doing is filling in other dots. The computer can read that.
Or choosing not to fill in dots.
That's right. So we didn't have a ballot for that, and we didn't have machinery for ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting. Now, in 2010, the city of Fort Collins, people in Fort Collins started to run an initiative to have Fort Collins run instant runoff voting elections for city council. And that year also, 2010, the city of Aspen ran an instant runoff voting election, which resulted in, I believe, 3 lawsuits in excess millions of dollars. I wonder if Jim True will hear this. Jim True was the city attorney in Aspen, and advocates and plaintiffs involved in the lawsuit said that they didn't have an instant runoff election as much as they had a true election, meaning that whoever Jim True said won the election, that's what it was. Okay? And that's how really it was majorly screwed up.
So if the city of Longmont would want to do approval voting, since the county coordinates our elections, would we have to get the county to do something with their election machines? I mean, what's the practical nuts and bolts part of getting approval voting used in the city of Longmont?
The city council would have to request it from the
City clerk? Or
no, from the who runs their elections, which is the county clerk. The county clerk. They could absolutely do it themselves in the same way that they don't do any other elections themselves. Longmont hasn't performed its own elections in 30 years.
I have no idea.
Okay, it contracts a county, either Weld or Boulder. I believe that it actually contracts both because
we have a portion in Weld County.
We're in 2 counties.
Like 1 precinct, I think it is. So, but if you had I can see how.
But the ballot, again, if they did make that request, there's nothing really for the clerk, the county clerk, to do that's anything special. They submit a ballot and you fill in more ovals than one.
Would that confuse voters? Like, for example, this fall, we have a special election that's going to be in with the general election, you know, for state offices and ballot.
In the city of Longmont, we have to often, in the city of Boulder as well, many cities where it says vote for 2.
Right.
Because you're filling 2 seats. Okay? Some years ago, we had an election that had multiple choice. We could have chosen one of 3, which was to include something in the charter, not include in the charter, or not consider it at all. So that was a multiple choice. That was on the ballot. The machine could read that. It didn't have a problem. That's approval voting.
So but it seems that we would have to do a lot of voter education to implement it.
I think that we'll be doing far more voter education and having far more spoiled ballots. That is where people fill out their ballot incorrectly with ranked choice voting, where they're either circling a number or putting in a number. They'll be circling a number, filling in an oval next to a number. I think that's actually going to be much of a challenge, a brain challenge for people, as opposed to, I want all of these people, I don't want any of these people, fill in the dots.
Well, we could do an analysis of what approval voting would have looked like
You're
for
right.
the last election for the multiple candidates we had for the at-large seat. So maybe Paul and I will have to get our pencils out and our pads and our calculators and sit down and do that, and then tell you who your city council people might have been.
Might have been? Well, so, my brother has a great saying, I think it's the Murphyism, and that is that you can't make things foolproof because fools are so ingenious.
Well, on that note, I'm Sarah Levison.
And I'm Paul Tiger.
And you can reach us on other things, we have an email address, which is,
bothsidesofcenter@gmail.com.
and we supposedly have a Twitter account, but I don't know. Who's on Twitter?
Yeah, there is a Both Sides of Center Twitter account. I'm not sure I know how that works.
We'll get better at these things. We have Facebook as well, so please give us a shout out on any of those platforms. Thank you.
And vote for approval voting.
That's right. Talk about it. Breaking news. Getting information from our field. Yes. Great. Thank you. Bye.